Now you might be wondering what are we doing in the hub still. Well, you see there are some training dummies here. You can use these to check how much damage you deal, check what type of swings your weapon have, see how many dummies it can cleave through, and learn if any of your swings can actually go through armor. These dummies are pretty limited however, since you cannot change what type of enemies they represent. They don't fight back, so you can't practice how to parry, dodge, or block, and you cannot set up things while practicing, so that at least you can try your talents before throwing them into the field. Now let's talk about the basics of combat, shall we? Starting with what you're taught of in the prologue. Pressing the left mouse button will let you do a light attack, which can vary between 2 to 4 attacks depending on the weapon. Most of these cannot go through armor, with some exceptions, so always test it out on the dummies first before throwing it into the field. Heavy attacks are done by holding the left mouse button, which can go through 1 to 3 cycles. These usually deal more damage or cleave through enemies. Spacebar is used for jumping, which you won't be doing much unless if you're hunting for those books. Be warned though, as being in mid-air causes your character to be weightless. This means an enemy with shockwaves or their own hitbox can just yeet you out into the nearest convenient cliff. You can crouch with the control key if you're hunting for more books. Dashing is done by moving in a direction that isn't forward while pressing the assigned button, which by the way, I suggest you bind this to a different key along with the jump button, since they're combined by default. The right mouse button allows you to block, with its stamina being indicated by the shields found below the center of your screen. These shields deplete after successfully blocking an attack and negating its damage, except for those done by certain monster attacks. The amount of shields depleted depends on the type of attack being blocked, if the weapon has a powerful block as one of its characteristics, and if it has modifiers for block cost reduction. Lastly, we have the push, which can be done by pressing the left mouse button while holding the right mouse button, which gives you space in cost of stamina. When it comes to career skills, they all have different uses, even if some of them look similar to each other. So just test them out by using the F button, and remember, each of these careers have a different cooldown to them, which can be anywhere between 20 seconds and 120 seconds. Now let's get to advanced, also known as the stuff that fatshark doesn't tell you about. Some of these are found by me or my mates, while others are things we recently learned thanks to the lovely subreddit, especially the ones by Orange Chris and Carrie Trent. Weapon characteristics are these things that you find here. See that? Zoom it in. There you go. These are basically a bunch of mumbo jumbo that sometimes are relevant, but most of the times are not. Armor piercing means that all of the weapon swings goes through armor. The thing is though is that there are weapons that can do that even though they don't have that characteristic. Example being the Dwarven Pickaxe. And speaking of the Dwarven Pickaxe, it has a characteristic known as Heavy Charge Attack, meaning that the weapon has 2 types of charge attack depending on how long the button was held. Which is also something that the Rapier have, even though it doesn't mention it. And yes, that means that most weapons have the same damage output regardless of how long have you held the button. Like what I said before, I suggest experimenting with the weapon instead of just reading these, if you catch my drift, since they don't really paint the entire picture. There is a subtle sound cue that happens when you're about to get hit, or when you're being targeted by infantry, in the form of a rat's throat singing, a grunt, or a swinging sound. Sadly, this only works when you're the host, or when you have really low ping. Since when you're lagging, the sound trigger actually happens after you get hit. Push block attacks are a thing you can do by holding the left mouse button while blocking to do a unique swing, a move that I learned 250 hours into the game, because nobody told me that it exists. Attack cycles between different types of swings, so a push attack can be squeezed between 2 light attacks, since it'll just continue through the cycle as if the combo wasn't interrupted. There is a lot that you can do with this mechanic that can make most weapons viable against any enemy type, as long as you know how to string the combos. Although I am not in any authority to teach you these combos. Someone like Party Knife is. Check him out if you want to see more specific guides. You can still cast a spell even if you think you're gonna go over your overcharge. Once that bar starts blinking, however, stop. Hitting enemies or getting hit by them will make your career skill cool off faster. Each career skill, however, differs when it comes to their recoveries. Blocking can be done even if you don't have any more stamina, aka shields. What it means is that when you're hit without any stamina, all it does is remove you from your block state for a little bit before reinitiating the block state again. Remember, you have phantom range and so do your enemies. Keep that in mind and always hold on to your block button every time you're near an enemy, regardless if they're targeting you or not. Weapons with shields can block enemy bullets and monster attacks, which usually goes through blocks. A weapon's default block angle can be found on the corner of the item card, right next to the stamina value. If you're doing tome runs, prioritize taking medical supplies over healing drafts. And speaking of which, always check your teammates if they need one, especially when they're the ones carrying the tome or another medical supply. I know I'm repeating myself here, but remember, using a medical supply on someone else will also clear your wounds if you have any. Healing items have a delay on them before they fully heal you, which means you can still go down from getting hit after consuming the item. It is always safe to assume that an enemy will always be faster than you, so don't get too cheeky by doing a light attack on an enemy that's about to hit you, or by drinking a potion or throwing a bomb in the middle of a horde. Speaking of assumptions, always assume that someone's behind you. Other than hyperstacking, a term used to describe enemies that are in the same place of existence, making it impossible for your swing to actually hit all of them, getting stabbed on the butt is where most of the enemy's chip damage is gonna come from. Bark skin is useful if you expect to get hit, a lot. Just keep in mind that it also triggers when you take friendly fire, which is the same rule with the dwarf's Gromno armor and the elf's focus spirit. The trait Natural Bond allows you to survive one-hit kills as long as you're in full non-temporary health. When reviving or rescuing your ally, you are automatically blocking. Just make sure that you're looking at your enemies and not your teammates while you're getting them up. With that in mind, while reviving or being revived/rescued, you might want to hold on to the right mouse button so that you're immediately blocking the moment you have control of your character again. You can use most of the career skills while healing, reviving, or rescuing someone. If your career skill can do knockback, perform a dash, or blink into a different location, you should probably use it to pull away the enemies from the one that you're trying to rescue or revive. Bots can be told to hold certain things by holding the tag button on an object that you want them to pick up, like a healing item, a tome, or a grim. You can also ask them to release the grim by holding the tag button on them. They, however, cannot listen to any chat wheel commands. Some power attacks can be held for an indefinite period of time, like the Elf's Sword or Kruber's DLC Spear. The Rapier and the DLC weapon Billhook have a thing called a weapon special, which you should rebind if your mouse doesn't have an extra button. The Waystalker, or the Huntsman with its career skill active, can use the weapon special when aiming with any of their ranged weapons to zoom in. The part about the Huntsman is actually something that I just recently learned while I was writing the script, so thanks for that, Ace Wilden. Getting interrupted while reloading disables the auto reload function, so remember to tap the R button the moment you get bonked in the head, as it can be the difference between life and death. The Billhook special can permanently stun lock 1 to 3 enemies, depending on how quick you are when it comes to switching targets, and how much stamina you're packing. Meanwhile, the Rapier's special fires its pistols, whose damage depends on the distance of the target, so try and go for those point-blank headshots if you're feeling feisty. The Beam Staff has 3 types of attacks: the beam, the shotgun, and the release. The third one can be done by pressing the right mouse button while the left mouse button is held, dealing a lot of damage while generating a lot of overheat as well. Flamethrowers don't deal a lot of damage against armored targets, but it does stagger them after a while. You can also dash while firing the charged version of the attack, which is nice since regular movement is slowed while firing it. Like what I said before, when the Witch Hunter's around, tag any special, elite, monster, or boss type enemy, and regardless of who tags it, it'll take more damage. Also, always tag, regardless if he's there or not. This game sucks when it comes to visibility, so do what you can to help yourself and your freshly lobotomized teammates in order to make the game that much more bearable to go through. Also, only tag an untagged target, as stacking it on the same enemy doesn't really do anything other than giving you that satisfying swoosh sound. Remember that you can tag enemies through things that can actually obscure vision, like smoke clouds and weaker enemies. The Fire Sword and the Flame Dagger's first heavy attacks cleaves and burns through all that it comes in contact with. Shield Bashes also have infinite cleave for pushing enemies away. Some attacks can actually give you an extra boost of speed, like the long charge attack on the pickaxe or the Flame Dagger's push block attack. Speaking of daggers, any weapon that has a dagger on it only consumes half of the stamina needed to do a push. Dashing has its distance and limits depending on what weapon you're currently holding. If you really want to familiarize yourself with your weapons, try spamming the dash button on the hub town, so you know how many times can you dash before slowing down into a crawl. Got all that? Good. It's time for us to tackle enemy types, starting with the elites, because as much as I want to talk about the infantry, they're pretty simple, so we're just gonna skip them. Maulers have tough heads, so try aiming for anything that isn't that, unless if your weapon can go through armor. With the right setup, storm vermins can die in one hit from some range builds, or a single power attack to the head. Just make sure you take out the ones with shields first, as they are far more annoying to deal with compared to their halberd counterpart. Berserkers are known for dishing out high damage in exchange for having low health. And they come in two types, one being the Savage that has the uncanny ability to disguise themselves as a weaker unit, and the Plague Monk, known for being the most dangerous unit in the game, as they dish out the highest damage per second if you don't block immediately. Just keep in mind that Berserkers always stay on a single target, so the moment that you're not the one getting hit, help your teammate out. Also, these types of enemies are most of the time never alone, so if you see one or two on the way, there's probably more hiding somewhere else. Lastly, be careful when jumping or when you're in mid-air and these things are around, as they have a ginormous hitbox for some reason, and they can push you off ledges. Beastigores are armored beastmen that loves charging. They look menacing at first, but other than their silly charge and stupid fast overhead, which we'll talk about later, they aren't much of a threat really, as they are as squishy as a storm vermin. Chaos Warriors are tanky walking refrigerators who are always your high priority target. Careers that focuses on burst needs to take these guys out quickly. These guys, along with the Maulers, Storm Vermins, and Beastigores, have this thing called an overhead attack, which can one-shot some careers. It has a long wind-up time, except for the one for the Beastigore, locks on to a single target with great precision, an annoyingly long phantom range, and will go through most, if not all of your stamina if you choose to block it. Hordes are events that makes weaker enemies spawn in waves. There are 3 types, or 4 depending if you have the cursed DLC. These trigger from time to time and have hidden cooldowns that you can exploit so that you can get ahead of the game by speeding through bad spots for hordes or trying to clear patrols or a monster that you know is coming on the next corner. The rats, chaos, and beastmen hordes can be heard before their attack with either a bell, a horn, or the groans of your teammates. One of the 3. However, there is a 4th type of horde that is done by the ratmen, which has a far more subtle sound cue. When you start hearing faint whispers from the background, get ready for an ambush. Ambush is a shorter type of Skaven horde which allows them to spawn in each corner of the map, as long as there's a crack, a wall, or a hole. Hell, sometimes they just spawn in areas where they're not supposed to spawn, stay underneath the terrain, and hit you from a location where you cannot see nor anticipate any of their attacks. Behold, the floor rats. Thanks, fatshark! Patrols are a large group of elites that circles around a certain path. They can be alerted or avoided depending on their route, which there's a lot of. Don't expect the same route just because you found them on the same location. Some of these routes can go outside of the map, which will give you enough room if you want to avoid them. If you're forced to take them out, however, make sure you have enough elite clearing weapons, or careers, a bomb or 2, and some room to wiggle. And with that in mind, it's always a bad idea to pull a patrol when there's a horde taking place. These patrols have a sound cue that can be heard from a distance, along with the sweet sound of armor grinding against each other. What? Although be careful, as for some reason, silent patrols exist. These patrols either spawned in front of you or somewhere else, but they forgot to do their little sound cue, and were apparently a problem that the game had ever since it was released, more than 2 years ago. Thanks, fatshark. Ah yes, specials. These are probably the reason why you will fail most of your runs. They don't have much health, but they do have some gimmicks which makes them dangerous. And I'm gonna go through them in an order from least threatening to most threatening. Starting with the Warp Fire Thrower and Rattling Gunner. They are a part of the same cut of cloth, what with them being armored, both of them having the same health pool, and both of them having the ability to confuse the boss pathfinding. But even then, they're in the bottom when it comes to who's the most threatening among all the specials. The Warp Fire's flamethrowers are unblockable unless if you have the DLC Knight. Their back is their weak point, but be careful since if they're killed this way, they will explode, leaving more fire on the ground. Rattling Gunners are their long-range counterparts, which are easier to stagger and are easier to deal with as long as you're not clutching with barely any health remaining. These specials are locked onto a single target, which allows the others to just take them out from the side. They will stop firing after a while, probably to reload or cool down their weapons, which gives you enough time to retaliate if you're alone or if you just want to handle them by yourself. Life Leech are a chaos type special that are known for the suck. They walk around slowly near the party's vicinity after spawning, before teleporting behind one of the players, preferably the one that's alone or weakened before firing an orb that will begin the suck. The suck's damage depends on the distance between the leech and their target. Not much can be said about this guy other than he's not really that dangerous unless if you wandered off from your team or you're just clutching. Packmasters, also known as hook rats, are slow-moving, loud vermins that snatches you and drags you away from your teammates, until a certain point where they then hang you up from the same hook until you either die or get rescued. They have this uncanny ability to blend in with their brethren, which makes them rather dangerous when they're mixed in with a horde. So keep your ears perked up when you hear that distinct audio cue. It is ill-advised to dodge their grabs with a backstep, as they have the phantom range which is almost always going to connect. Gutter runners, also known as assassins, are these fast buggers from the land of definitely not Japan. These specials pin you down to the ground followed by a shockwave that will knock your teammates away, hopefully into ledges. They deal low damage but they won't stop until they are released through friendly fire or by ally intervention. If one spawns, which is quite obvious since they are pretty damn loud, immediately tag them once they're on site, so everyone can be aware of their movement, as they are the fastest enemies in the game. They can also be shoved back with careful timing, but it's much safer to just sidestep the lunge. Globadiers are the bane of wounded players, known for having a terrible habit of showing up at the worst of times, which leads to many wipes. They throw 2 gas bombs in the air, or the ceiling if they're stupid enough, which creates a gas cloud that deals massive damage. They are pretty squishy, but if they get wounded enough, they will charge one of you guys, detonating themselves for one last hurrah. It is advised to always wait out the clouds unless if you're feeling desperate, as the cloud itself can be used as cover against the enemy, since it deals friendly fire damage. Blightstormers are the worst specials in the game, courtesy of the Chaos Legion. They teleport into a spot that hopefully you can see, let alone hit them from, channeling a spell that creates a storm that changes size and speed to suit their needs. This storm will suck up all in its path minus Chaos Warriors and monsters while dealing high damage. These pricks should be on the top of your priority, as they can turn any run sour if one of them gets their spell off. And after that happens, they'll just teleport into another random location, probably in an area where you can't reach them, let alone see them. And once their spell ends, they'll just teleport into the thick of things again, just to annoy you more. When channeling their spells, beams of light will fly from the caster into the destination, allowing you to pinpoint their locations before they can fully cast the spell off. Now what makes these guys such a total pain in the butt, however, has something to do with how they behave. You see, they can just cast the spell in any location, regardless of any other factors such as the terrain or just overwhelming amounts of opposition, allowing them to freely cast a spell off without any kinds of repercussion. And once this happens, always tell your team so that you guys can all chat it up on who gets to become the sacrificial lamb, since if one of you guys gets deliberately sucked into the storm, the others can actually circle around it, as it will stop moving the moment it has somebody on its grasp. Lastly, we have the sack rats, which are not actually threats on the battlefield, but they are a good way for you or your team to throw the game away. These rare creatures carry an assortment of goodies, from bombs to potions to even a loot dice. You know one's near when you hear the sound of their sack or their adorable cry. These guys will book it once they spot a hero and will despawn after a while. Yes, even if they're in view. And that's it for the specials. Oh, right. Flag bearers are pretty simple. They are heavily armored melee units that drops a stick on the ground, which buffs beastmen, and thankfully only beastmen, with increased health and regeneration. Attacking the stick with melee or throwing a bomb at it will break it, and that's about it. If it isn't obvious yet, other than the flag bearer's melee attacks or the rattling gunner if you have a shield, the special's attacks are actually unblockable, so you might want to learn how to sidestep. Lastly, warp fire throwers, gatling runners, globadiers, and blightstormers deal friendly fire damage, so try and use that to your advantage if you're feeling desperate. And so finally, we get to the big guys, the monsters. Monsters are these big boys that will put your run to a screeching halt while making the disablers feel like a threat. These guys come in 4 or 5 different flavors, each requiring a different strategy to take them down, unless if you want to go for the common route, which involves blocking indefinitely and dodging backwards until the cows come home, or until your teammates takes it down. Because truth be told, these guys will barely give you any chance to hit them back, unless if you know what you're doing. You know they're coming once you hear that certain cry from a distance, along with their theme, or in the case of the Storm Fiend, some sick beats. In terms of whoever the monster is gonna prioritize, it has something to do with several factors like who knocked them back with a skill or a bomb, and who dealt the highest amount of damage. A little side note, when a monster appears and the party is currently preoccupied with something else, split the party up so that one of you can actually distract the monster while the rest takes care of the horde. Because truth be told, the monster is actually a lower priority. As the distraction, remember to take your surrounding into consideration, as a small piece of rubble or a cliff will be enough to kill you and probably your entire party in the process, especially since a monster can just knock you off that cliff. Speaking of cliffs, you can actually use those against the monsters themselves. If your skill can knock them back, or if you have a bomb with you, you can just throw it at them while they're near a cliff and instantly kill them. Sure, you won't get the guaranteed loot die, but it's a small price to pay in some cases just to get them out of the way. Now unlike the specials, I'm gonna go through these guys in random order, because truth be told, each of these creatures have ruined a run or two in our games. So, let's begin with the Rat Ogre. I hate this guy. He's a spitty bugger who attacks really fast and has the ability to switch targets even faster. In fact, he is so quick that you're better off preemptively dodging or blocking just to get ahead of this guy. One thing to keep in mind is his super fast double-fisted ground pound, which cannot be blocked unlike his other moves. There is a way to put this guy in an attack loop, but if you're curious about that, go ahead and look it up yourself. One Rat Ogre is guaranteed to spawn in the end of Screaming Bell. Bile Trolls are the slowest of the monsters, whose cry I always confuse with the Rat Ogre. These creatures are pretty easy to handle, until you realize that the second half of their name isn't just flavor text, and they start regenerating their health. In terms of what to keep in mind when fighting this beast, well, there are a couple of things. First, we have the Vomit. This comes in 2 types. One is fired downward, while the other one is fired forward in a line. If you're hit, you're blinded for a few seconds while it drains your stamina. In terms of unblockable attacks, all swings done by his axe are considered unblockable. So remember to strafe and dodge to the left where the axe is located relative to you. His tracking is awful anyways, so he's not that much of a hassle. Now let's talk about that regeneration. When he gets to 50% of his health, he will fall down on all fours and you need to take down that other health bar before he gets back up, or he will regenerate that health again. If you fail to take this down, he will have 2 cycles of regeneration instead of just 1. So ready your career skills and start aiming for the head to avoid elongating the fight. One is guaranteed to spawn in the end of Hunger in the Dark. Chaos spawns are these weird looking creatures whose head is still a complete mystery to me. I mean, I can kinda see it, I'm just not sure if I'm hitting it. These guys have 2 attacks that cannot be blocked, being a slam and the other one being the grab. When this creature is about to slam its not tentacle arm down, be prepared to dodge backwards. The other attack that cannot be blocked is the grab, which is telegraphed by a tentacle attack that swings from the back to the front rather than a circle, which is the blockable sweep attack. If one is fortunately grabbed, a knockback skill or a bomb can free you before the creature starts nibbling on your head, which heals it. One is sorta guaranteed to spawn in the middle of Skittergate as a mini-boss. Minotaurs are your DLC Beastmen monsters who are silly fast axe-wielding maniacs. Their axe-wings can be blocked or dodged, while the horn attacks are unblockable. This guy also comes with a charge attack, much like the Beastigore, which you cannot block and must dodge at the last second. One is guaranteed to spawn in the end of the DLC map Dark Omens. Storm Fiends are slow, lumbering, armored rat ogres equipped with flamethrowers. They're not that bad actually when you put into consideration that they lost most of their speed, making them the second easiest but probably the most annoying one to deal with. You see, since they only have one type of attack which cannot be blocked, obviously, being the flamethrower, they love using it at range. So what do? They hop around the terrain where you cannot get to them, so they can fire their little flamethrowers. They have a weak point on their back, this fetus looking thing. Just be careful as it changes its aggression quickly once it's hit. Also, unlike the other monsters, this one doesn't have a guaranteed spawn to it, unless if you count the powered up version of the creature found in the end of Skittergate. Speaking of Skittergate, bosses. There are a total of 5 bosses in the game, and neither of them requires a DLC if you want to fight them. I'm just gonna go in natural order, starting with the worst boss of them all, which is such a great way to introduce your players to the bosses, with Benedict Burble Hailscourge, found on Hailscourge. He is a tanky plague stormer who is known for his Chinese martial arts apparitions, highly telegraphed plague storm that my friends keep falling into, and getting hit on the heel while standing on a piece of plywood. This guy is a bit of a pain in the butt to fight, mainly because of how ping dependent all of his attacks are. You'll get hit by his waves of Guiji more often than not, and without any sustain, you're pretty much on a time limit on this boss fight. Since once you're by yourself, rescuing your teammates is nearly impossible due to the amounts of mobs he spawns alongside the knockback that his waves do. But enough about my PTSD, let's talk about his movesets. Starting with the aforementioned Guiji waves. He begins the fight with this move by teleporting into the center of the arena and raising his hands, firing goo all over the place. There is a standard version of this attack where he fires 3 Guijis in a cone. These goo will act as your little time limit, as he's gonna be constantly doing this while he's on the ground. A strange suggestion is just to ignore him in this part of the fight, and just keep an eye out on who is he locked into, so the others can split up from that target, while that person tries to dodge or use the pillars on the arena as cover. That, or try and fail to chase down this prick while he fires his wave at you to push you back, before teleporting to another location right before you can try to catch up to him. Oh, and the teleport also deals damage, by the way. Great boss, TY Fatshark Uwu. When he's dry out of goo, he will hop to the second floor of his blown up manor where he will start calling Northlanders while firing some sort of a swarm. This swarm will stun you in place until you go down, unless if your teammates can interfere by swatting out the flies with a melee weapon. These flies can also be hit while traveling, which is way better than waiting for one of them to stick to your teammates. When he's lounging around on the second floor of his building, that's actually the best time to attack him, since he's immobile, for the most part. Just split up the group on who gets to deal with the chaos, and who gets to deal with him. Just highlight this fat ass through the plywood and start smacking him in the legs until he gets so knocked up that he moves into a different platform. After a while, he's probably gonna go down again, but he's probably not gonna do the same attack. Instead, he will call in a plague storm. This is telegraphed by slamming his staff twice on the floor, which creates a magic circle. And that's about it for this guy. Next up is, Scarrick, Spine Mangler, who is found on the map titled Into the Nest. He is a pathetic boss and is probably the easiest one to burst down. He comes with a typical halberd and 2 swords that are usually held by the storm vermins. When he has these swords out, he practically acts like a berserker, so focus on dodging and blocking when he's onto you. When he's wielding the spear, he's easier to handle as long as you brace yourself for his wide swing attack. Other than that, just watch for his attacks, block everything, and dodge what you can. Don't get overwhelmed by the large amount of storm vermins that he spawns, which are a bigger threat compared to him actually. After all, he's just another one of them, just slightly tankier and with a lot more moves to spare. He's simple. You really shouldn't have any problems with him. His map will give you more trouble than he will, much like the next boss that we're gonna talk about. Bodvar Leg Spreader is a big boy found in the end of War Camp, and you can consider him a slightly tougher Scarrick. But that isn't saying much. If Scarrick is a slightly tankier Storm Vermin, Bodvar is a slightly larger and slightly beefier Chaos Warrior, who basically have the same movesets as a Chaos Warrior, along with his exclusive moves, one being the Axe Throw and the other one being the Ground Pound. There's nothing else that can be said about this guy really. All of his moves can be blocked easily, and other than his cry for help later, he's barely a threat. A bit of a damage sponge, yes, but he can easily be dealt with. Also, a little side note, he sometimes never calls for help, and I still don't know how to recreate it. Next, we have the base game's final bosses found in Skittergate. One is Naglfar, fought halfway through the map, who is basically a shorter and weaker Bodvar, and needs no further discussion. Lastly, we have the real pain in the butt, that being Death Rattler and Racksnip. Let's start with the big boy first. Death Rattler is basically a storm fiend who decided to be a rattling gunner instead of a warfire thrower. His attacks are familiar. You got the gunfire that has poor tracking so you can easily dodge out of the way of it, or block it entirely by using a shield or the pillars in the arena. A slam attack that will probably be the thing that will be hitting you a lot, a punch that is easy to dodge, or the charge attack that knocks you back. What makes this fight rather hectic is the constant spawning of mobs along with some elites, and the fact that Raxnit is a part of the equation. At certain points, Raxnit's gonna fall off his trusty chariot and will start to annoy you with his spells. My suggestion is to have one of your teammates split up and stunlock Raxnit until he goes back to his chariot, while the rest of the team tries to burst down Death Rattler or try to manage the Horde. Once Death Rattler is dead, the fight is almost over and all you need to do now is not choke on the Raxnit fight. This guy is oddly tanky for how small and unarmored he is. Anywho, he will start spawning hordes while teleporting into one of the 4 corners of the map. And all you have to do is split up on those 4 corners and make sure that one of you is stun locking Raxnit. Remember, as long as he's being hit, he cannot pull out any of his spells, unless if he needs to teleport into another corner. Speaking of spells, he has 2. He can throw lightning bolts that deals low damage, and a lightning pillar, which doesn't deal that much damage but it pushes you back. Shield rats along with the occasional storm vermin and plague monks are the actual threat of this fight, instead of Raxnit himself. Once he's down to very low health, he will start randomly teleporting until he stops near the center of the arena, where he can finally deal the killing blow and air quotes beat the game. Now for the newly added boss being Nurgloth the Eternal, the DDR boss fight who's found in the end of the Enchanter's Lair. Much like his lookalike, Cumberbatch, he's pretty damn difficult all things considered, but he probably has the most fun mechanics compared to the other boss fights. The first thing that you need to learn about this guy is the whole exploding floor mechanic, and that's not the first time that I've said that. I played Crash Bandicoot 2. You see, when he's on the ground, which is the only time that he's vulnerable by the way, he will start slamming the floor, which will start to glow in a specific spot. After a short delay, it'll explode, dealing decent damage while knocking you off elsewhere. This can be dodged by simply hopping or, I don't know, by not standing on the glowing floor. His boss fight is pretty self-explanatory in the first phase. Just stick together, kill the Horde, and take out the flies that works the same ways as the one by Hail Scourge. Once he's down to 1/3 of his health bar, the real pain begins. The outskirts of the arena will start exploding periodically, and the Enchanter will start floating. And once he's up in the air, he will start swinging his sight on a single target. When this phase begins, it's time to split up the group again. Some of you need to take care of the Horde that will now continuously spawn in each corner of the map. The one being chased by Nurgloth has one job: block, avoid the edges, and survive, while the remaining needs to take care of the boss before you get overwhelmed. This is kind of a strict time limit as you will be flooded with enemies, and if 1 or 2 of you goes down, it's game over as the boss will just zero in on that survivor and not give him any chance to get anyone up. Very fun boss that even has its own introductory cutscene. I wish the others can be reworked to be as fun as this one.